turn the
Yeah,
head
that
down
would
there.
be the challenge right there. So is this the hot seat right here?
Sure.
I'll let you have access to the computer there and.
Excellent.
So how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Grad student didn't make it down today?
He didn't make it today.
Oh, yeah.
He gave this very similar presentation. He used it for his master's thesis defense.
Oh,
So you had a number of other academics in the class.
pardon?
Focus on
Who's the
him.
grad student?
His name is Pedro. His name is right here. He was with me last time I was here.
Okay. Then he, when we went and looked at the warehouses, was there?
Yeah, he was there too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great. Well, I certainly appreciate this opportunity to meet with you guys and be able to share some of the work that we've been able to do. I think from a professional perspective, we really like this type of a project because it has some real practical applications to it. And we can see how it could be, how it can grow, how it can get stunted, and it's sort of a dynamic type of a project. We like that piece right there. I think from a personal perspective, I like this project as well. My dad was an elevator superintendent for ADM for a number of years before he retired. I was actually a grain merchandiser early in my career. So the combination of the two really kind of fit nicely for me here from a personal perspective. So I think from a personal and both professional, this is a very enjoyable project to work on. So thank you guys for the opportunity. So what it is we have here, our title here is a decision to invest in a shuttle train loading facility. It's the case of Stafford County, Kansas in this case. Myself, Keith Harris, and Pedro Massey, the graduate student who worked on this as well. What we're going to do today in terms of kind of following this piece, oh, I forgot to give you something here. I have the slide presentations for these as well. So this is just in case you need to have notes.
Thank you.
And I've also provided an executive summary for you to read when you feel like you need a little bit more. And there'll be another accompanying report later on with much more details. So that's just a one-pager, just sort of summarizing things there. So, from a roadmap perspective, where we're going to go today is we're going to talk about just a little bit of background that you guys are very familiar with, but also the purpose of the study. Then we want to kind of look at some of the methods that we use in order to be able to assess financial feasibility in this case. We want to go over some of the data and sources of information. We want to get into the operational cost as well, what it costs to run this operation on a day-to-day basis. And then we drop that down into sort of an income statement, so you can see more numbers, carry out a little bit more financial analysis, and then a recommendation of the future considerations within this here. I think this will work absolutely best if you guys see something that you want to stop and talk to me about, say, Keith, let's talk on this. If you're not clear enough here, or let's elaborate on that a little bit more, so feel free to do that. And Kurt, Clayton, and Todd, there may come a slide where I'm going to say, hey, what do you guys think about this? We certainly kind of want to see this as a collaborative process. Okay. So, as you guys know, particularly with the background of this project, we know that the grain shuttle loading facilities have gotten quite popular in the United States, particularly in Kansas, in Iowa, in Nebraska, as well as Montana for that matter. But we also know that there's been some grain companies, multinational in some cases, that have looked in this area and decided to invest in other places. So we want to understand that a little bit more. What is it that moved them into a different direction, or what was that gap that is that had them to look somewhere else instead of here, right? And then after understanding that gap, we want to be able to understand what does it take potentially to maybe overcome that gap, maybe some other opportunities that might kind of narrow that gap a little bit. So that's kind of the background on it. So when we look at this infrastructure for grain shedding loading facility, we want to start off with, we're looking at this from a facility that would be loading and unloading both rail and truck for that matter, high-speed type of equipment that is, right? When we look at these shuttle loading facilities, guys, we're talking about 110, 120 unit cars in some cases, right? You can go down as low as 70 in many cases, but they've gotten to a point now where they're 110, 120 rail cars. So we need that high-speed loading and unloading capability to take advantage of the railroad's assets. And that's a key partner in this, and we'll talk about that a little bit later here. But servicing primarily bulk agricultural commodities. The proposed facility of what we see this, guys, is we're seeing a $2 million bushel capacity facility in this case. One that can load wheat, corn, and it could be constructed in manners of steel or concrete. And the capital expenditure in this case, we're looking at the $16 to $20 million investment in this case. Which leads us to the question, something that we can kind of focus on here. What are the investment options for a shuttle train facility in Stafford County, Kansas? What are those investment options? And even make it even simpler in this case, at least for me in this case, does it make sense? Is it affordable? And when will the return be sufficient? Right? And those are just some basic questions that we sort of kind of came out of this, but they all fold into that very one. What are those investment options for the shuttle train facility in Stafford County, Kansas? Our objective in this case, Todd, we wanted to be able to identify the determining factors for public-private investment into the grain shuttle facility. Okay. Clayton, we wanted to also determine the economic feasibility of such investment. Okay. Those are our objectives, and we feel if we can answer those, if we can get to those objectives, we'll be able to come close, if not answer, Kurt, the actual question that we have here. Now, we use a number of different methods here in terms of being able to calculate financial feasibility. And this is one of them. And this is the primary one that we've used. And we used to call this the net present value. This is an age-old type of a formula in this case that helps business decisions on whether to invest or not. And to maybe explain this, if you look at the net present value calculation here, that C sub 0, which is the capital expenditure cost, that begins to be sort of that initial investment, right? Let's say you're going to invest $10 million, for example. That will be that initial investment. Then we look at C sub T, that is the net cash flows or outflows for any period of time. So when we make an investment, we know that at some point in time, year 1, 2, and 3, we're going to get some cash flows coming in, right? We're going to get revenue coming in. We're going to get income coming in. But because they come out to us from year 1, $1 million, 2, $200,000, 3, whatever that number is, if we look at all that out to like a 10-year period, for example, assuming that might be the investment horizon in this case, we're expecting a payback, then what we have to do is we have to take those cash values and we have to bring them back to a present value in this case. So in some cases, we're going to have to discount them. So to make that even clearer, hopefully, is that if you have an $8 million investment, or $10 million investment, I should say, and you get these cash flows, right? We're going to add up all those cash flows, discount those cash flows to come back to a present value. And if the initial investment was $10 million and our discounted cash flows are $8 million, that's not a good investment. We're in the red here. If we get those cash flows discounted back to us in a present value at $10 million and $2, that's a positive investment here. We just want it to be a positive relationship as opposed to a negative relationship. So that's what we were going to be doing in this case as well. We also did some other type of analysis as well. We hold that for the paper that was published and things like that. But we also got in things, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. The competition in the area, the concentration of activity that's going in the area. We want to take a look at all those factors to come up with some understanding in terms of whether or not this investment is a good investment for us. Okay. So data. So Kurt, in this case, let's take a look at the very top here. We had to take a look at a lot of the cash prices right here in Stafford County. We're able to get that information on wheat and corn. We looked at it for over a 10-year period in that case. For wheat and corn, we were able to get that from some secondary data coming from the USDA, right? USDA is really, the government is good at collecting data, right? But we were able to take advantage of that piece right there. As such, so we got that from USDA. We also have to take a look at freight rates for that matter as well. Freight is a very important component to what we're doing here in this case. So we want to take a look at freight rates, particularly from here, this region, all the way to the Gulf, which is potentially where the exporting will take place for the most part. We could take a look at the Pacific Northwest or Long Beach, California, which are also locations in which you can export. But we kind of, to narrow our focus here, we just did it from this area to the Gulf, and we were able to look at the USDA. It's just a grain transportation report there, and it gives an idea of tariff rates, it gives an idea of fuel surcharges, all those things that make up the freight cost. And we'll have to say too, this may be a little bit of a very conservative number In fact, because the numbers that are posted are maybe on the higher end of things. Some of the rail companies or some of the multinationals, they get other deals that we don't see, right? So they get other better freight rates that we don't see. And the railroads are not good on working with people that deal in hypothetical situations, right? So if we had something very concrete, we could probably get a different rate. But we had to end up going with the upward rate here because of the study itself was more hypothetical in their minds. We also looked at operational costs. We were be able to look at some internal type values to get that type of information. Internal reports, secondary reports, things of that nature. Volume. We had to do a lot of talking to kind of get a feel for understanding what the volume is. The discount rate, we would get that from the Federal Reserve, and we had a number of different interviews also. Which also makes this, I think, a very interesting study here is that the people that we interviewed along the way also. You can look at the list there all the way down from, starting from MKC all the way to ADM, and just take a look in this case of the data that we were able to get from them. Like say, for example, in MKC, we were looking at what are the profit margins that we should expect coming from something like this? What are the volume that is necessary in order to make this work? What are the costs, operational costs? How often should our inventory be turned over, for that matter? What is an acceptable payback period that multinational or grain companies would be willing to accept? And trading mix, how much of you are you trading it, or how much of you are storing it, for that matter? How much of it is wheat and how much of it is corn? So given that, we talked to a number of different firms. O'Neill Consulting was a big part of this as well, provided some very similar data in this case. Wind River Grain, Pawnee Co-op, for example, gave us information. Stafford County Mill, Continental Grain and Barge, ADM. So we got a lot of different type of insight. So, which was good because you can see reports from the USDA, for that matter. But it's also good to have somebody to validate that. But you can have somebody to say something from an interview, but it's good to have the USDA number to validate that, right? So we have this method here where we could just take a look at a lot of different input and verify if our data was accurate in that case. Now, here are some of the factors that we found to be very important when we're looking at making an investment in a shuttle loading facility. And a lot of this information comes from communities in Montana, again, in Iowa and Nebraska, as well as Kansas as well. What are the factors that are necessary in order to really look at this piece here? So let's take a look at some of the risk factors in the very left-hand column there, starting with the volume traded, and then we're going to look at how significant it is and what is the type of risk in this case. So in the case of volume traded, a very, very important factor. That's one of the factors we saw from every study that we've seen in terms of how you make this sort of project viable, financially viable or financially feasible in this case. So we make this a very high significant in that case. From a value, we look at a risk type here, it's the value chain, right? Because it's going to involve more than one firm to get the volume there, right? You have the farmers, you have the elevators, for that matter, or cooperatives, for that matter, as well as the origination piece. So you have a whole value chain involved in making that volume piece work. A supplier relationship, that's also very high in this case. Now, again, because you need to have, because that grain elevator, it needs to have that, in that case, the country elevator that's involved as well. Very high, and that's also a value chain relationship. Commodity prices, commodity price spreads, and we're looking at prices from the U.S., from this area to the Gulf for that matter, just kind of look what those price spreads might be. So we have that as being significant and more of a market related here. Okay? Of course, we can look at the market related ones as saying this may present some areas of volatility, so we have to do a little bit more sensitivity analysis on that to show that this thing could move up, down, or sideways for that matter. Transportation costs, which we talked about a little bit more, a very important piece. That's also a market risk in this case. Competition, also a very high piece as well. That's also a market type of risk that we're facing. The capital structure, whether you're going to use some type of debt financing or equity financing is an important piece of this. Interest rates, the carrier relationship, management and labor, public-private partnership. So these are pretty much rated from very high to very low in terms of the risk factor in this case. So I'm curious, what do you guys, what do you think about this piece right here relative to Stafford? Do you have any thoughts on that you can share with us that might be?
By the significance of being low in management and labor, you just don't think it would be hard to find the people to do the work right here?
Primarily. That's something that could be outsourced as well, for that matter, right? What we found in going through this study is that, there are a number of guys that would, multinationals would love to be able to manage something like this.
They just want access to the grain for their overall
Network.
operation. Network.
No doubt. I mean, there's an incentive for them to do something like that, right? So that's
So
why
they'd move people in here to manage it then?
potentially. Yeah, that's why we have that one rated fairly low. Very good point.
When you say volume of trade, you mean how many farmers are bringing grain in there
Mhm.
to it?
Absolutely.
And then the supplier relationship would basically be, again, with the farmers bringing where they're selling the grain off to.
Yes, exactly. So I guess there's two ways in which you can have a supplier in this case. You can have a supplier being, you have a direct relationship with the grower, with the farmer, or you can have a supplier relationship with the local elevator.
Yeah, you couldn't be in total competition with the local elevators all the time.
You couldn't get
I don't think that'd work around here.
Yeah,
I mean, the flour mill's gonna have some dedicated people that are gonna take grain to it.
Yeah. And they're gonna be able to pay more for wheat than an exporter would,
Yeah.
usually, because they got the flour market right there.
Yeah.
Right, here.
But, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say too, Kerry, it's really interesting too, we saw from looking at some of the premiums paid by several loading elevators are quite high. I mean, you're looking at 8 to 20% of the bushel higher in some cases. So that will be a decision that the grower will make, where do I sell my grain? But that is a part of the volume trade though.
It might be a good outlet for those that don't reach the premium, They might,
Sure.
They don't meet what?
that don't meet their premium grade
Yeah.
Yeah.
up there.
Absolutely. So from an operational standpoint, we look at the facility, how the facility will be configured here. We're looking at 4 steel or concrete bins with the 400,000 bushel storage in this case. We're also looking at upright storage costs, being it steel or concrete. Look at $5.50 a bushel, be it for steel, $7.50 a bushel, be it for concrete. And Clayton, we can also look at the next point here, the linear trackage and switch requirements in this case. So we're basically talking about the fixed cost when we talk about facility configuration and the linear track and switch requirements here. We're looking at land's going to be required to be about 50 to 100 acres in this case. Costs, or land costs, whether it's $2,000 for dry land or $5,000 for irrigated land. Linear foot, in this case, we're talking about 11,000 to 15,000 feet. This is as opposed to a loop track, because we found that a loop track would require more than 100 acres of land in this case. Right? So if we went with the, not going with the loop track, we're looking at 11,000, 15,000 square feet is what we need for this. And we need switches, a mainline switch and 3 industry switches in this case. So again, these are essentially just to be our fixed cost for this operation. Our next slide is, now we're getting a bit more into the day-to-day cost, if you will, so the operational cost of an elevator in this case. We have it broken down by the handling expenses. On the far left here, we have the grain cash prices, for example, shrink, moisture, fumigation, et cetera, and we're doing it for corn and wheat. So each one of these factors is what we took a look at in terms of what is going to be the cost of operating this particular type of investment in this case. And our variable cost here comes down to nearly 6 cents a bushel if we look at it from a corn perspective, and more like 4 cents a bushel when we look at it from a wheat handling, a wheat operational cost in this case. Salary in this case, we're again looking a little bit more at our fixed costs here. So we have our variable costs for the most part on the far left, here, and we have our fixed costs on the far right here, salaries, benefits, maintenance as a percentage of the facility cost, insurance of the facility for that matter. So we're looking at a total fixed cost of $907,000, and on a cost per bushel basis, we're looking at 12 cents per bushel in fixed cost to run an operation like this. The latter part here, we have the positions that would be involved here, merchandising managers, operations managers, logistics supervisors, elevators, advisors, assistants, accounting, things of that nature. So now we're looking at, and we're just kind of breaking out this salary section at the very top here. We're providing more detail in this section right here. So that 575 that we see at the very top here, we break that out, and you can see how we come up with the 575 in that case. We found this to be a very interesting slide. I don't know what you guys think about that piece right there. Any thoughts you might have on what may stand out to be a surprise to you, or you just think, hey, that's right on the mark, or never even thought about it?
On your moisture loss on your bushels,
Mhm.
where it says like on forms 41%,
Yeah.
I mean, halfway down, right there,
Right there.
44 cents.
0.04.
4 cents a bushel.
Oh, 4 cents.
Yeah,
a bushel.
0.04.
Oh, okay.
It wouldn't be very much.
Yeah, that wouldn't be very much. I thought it was 44.
You thought it was 44?
That's way high.
I think it's like popcorn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be 4 cents, so almost 4.5 cents as well. And that's, I think that's where our biggest cost there when it comes to the difference in the corn and the wheat in that case. Our corn is a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's harder to manage.
Yeah, exactly. So, 5 cents a bushel on our variable cost for corn, 4 cents a bushel for our variable cost on wheat, and we're looking at 12 cents a bushel for our fixed cost. And I often like to say is that
Close to me.
clear as the Caribbean or muddy as the Mississippi?
Good to me.
That's interesting.
Okay. Clear as the Caribbean, right? Okay, now, here's something here that we want to take a look at is, we have what we call a base model, and then we also have a model that we can look at this in a very pessimistic way and a very optimistic way. The optimism comes into the volume, right? Sometimes the volume isn't there, some years it is there for that matter. So that's that volatility that we're talking about, So because this is a volume-driven type of a project, we use our base model in this case. And arriving at our base model numbers here, we've taken a look at all the counties in the area in this case. All the counties in the area. This very top section here, guys, is all for wheat, and we'll jump down to corn down here a little bit later here. But let's focus on the wheat portion right here. And what we had to do is we had to take a look at how much wheat and corn is exported out of the state. Because that essentially becomes what we're going to use to determine that will be, I should say that's going to leave the state, but could potentially be exported out of the country for that matter, right? So we're trying to get a feel for what is the available volume that we have in this area, right? So we came up with some figures, and with some input from Carolyn here, we did some readjusting of these numbers in this case. But we saw that there was like 23% of the product, 23% of the wheat grown in the state leaves the state, okay? Leaves the state by rail for that matter. But we made some adjustments to this and says, well, let's go a little bit higher. Instead of 23%, let's say 33% of the wheat in the state leaves. Okay, so now we're trying to get our arms around how much volume we're dealing with. We know how much the state produces. We know how much of that product is exported. And we're just going to sort of apply that to some degree to this area here. Okay, so we took it up another level. So we're saying 33% of the wheat produced in the state leaves the state, which could be an opportunity for an elevator, okay, for the export market. Okay, so in doing that, we were to take a look at all the counties here in this area. We were to take a look at what their annual shipments might be, okay? Based off of that 33%. And we're also taking a look at their storage, what are their capacities. We get a real good feel for how much capacity that is in these counties in this case. Now, we're having to make an assumption in this case, that in the case of Stafford County for that matter, if it was able to get, if it was able to get 50% of the market share, if it was able to extract 50% of that market share so it could be exported and leave, which is kind of an aggressive number.
It's 50% of what the calculations are for what is exported. It's not 50% of the overall
That
number,
is
just to
correct.
just be clear on,
That is true.
okay.
Yeah,
The
you said that very well. You said that very well. It's 50% of what could be exported, not the entire, say that again. You said it better than I did.
I don't know, it's calculated as
Yeah.
50% of what you estimate to be shipments leaving the state,
Yes,
not 50% of overall production for the county.
50% of what is leaving the state, that is correct. That is correct.
So that was part of my questions
Mhm.
last week, knowing that we may not have as much in Stafford County that is leaving by rail currently. We don't have the facilities here currently, even like the elevators aren't shipping out just on, 5 or 7 load. Like in the
Yeah.
old days, Kansas Co-op here would have loaded out a few rail cars right here on this facility. It's not even hooked up now. So, so Stafford County may currently not have as much leaving the state by rail, even not considering shuttle loading facilities. So that was part of my question
Sure it was, yes.
last week, was using the assumption of how much is leaving the state by rail as an estimate of how much is available for export and how much that might be, I don't know, we might look at the considerations of Stafford County slightly differently.
We did.
And that's
And that's-
where you have taken the assumption from 20% up to 30%.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And of course, saying that, we're not going to get all of that wheat in this example for this facility. We won't get all of it, but if we get a big portion of it, in this case, 50% of it. And in the other counties, we're saying, we're looking at their market share, we're able to get 5% from these counties above and 15% from these counties below here. We're going to be able to come up, what we believe is like 4.5 million bushels of wheat, based upon the market share that we're able to extract and based upon the amount of product that is actually being shipped today. How much can we get of that? Is that clear? Clayton, no, discussion. And we did the very same thing for corn as well. Corn, we looked at this by counties. We looked at how much corn is actually being shipped out of the county for that matter. That number was different though. It wasn't we didn't use a 33% in this case. We used a 27%. So for wheat, we did 27%. For corn, we did 33%. Yeah, corn, we did it at 27%. Exactly. Again, with the same mindset here is how much of that market share can we get from these areas? Pratt, Ford, Reno counties for that matter, different.
Could you back up?
Different.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So is the bottom one corn?
The
Yeah.
bottom is corn.
So you say that we produce almost twice as much, or 25% more wheat than corn?
No. What we're saying in this case is that you produce more corn than wheat.
But like on here, it says 2
That's
point,
what could be exported.
oh, that's
Yeah.
what could be exported?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the 27% of what could be, that's leaving the state, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think when we looked at the numbers, I think we saw nearly 4 million bushels on average over the last 5 years. This county has produced about 4 million bushels a year on corn. On wheat, it does about, I think the number's like 2.8 I think it's 2.8 million bushels. I have the value, no, I
Yeah.
just can't remember. But no, you definitely produce more corn in the state, but it's what is being exported. That's the market that we're going after, the export market, not necessarily the domestic market. And you export more wheat than you export corn.
Okay.
So we're trying to get a portion of that wheat and a portion of that corn.
Just to make sure I'm saying this correct, or thinking this through correctly. 33% of shipments, not of the global market share. 33% of shipments is the base that we're working
That
from.
is the
And
base.
then we're taking 50% of that 33%
For export.
First,
as available for this particular facility.
exactly, for that 50, for Stafford.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
So it's really, yeah, it's not a majority of the market share by, or what is produced overall by any
Oh,
means.
by any means, by any means. Again, you know, the great state of Kansas produces a lot of wheat and corn, but not all of it leaves the state. And that's the market that we're going after, what is leaving the state. So in this case, we arrive at 4.5 million bushels for the wheat, and we're arriving at 2.6 million bushels, only 2.7 million bushels for the corn. You know, and this is just the base model. So we have some, let's go into this right here. This is where we started to look at the competition that we're going to be faced with. Which is a really good indicator in terms of the volume that you're going to be able to get, and in some cases the value. So what we can see here is that this green dot represents Stafford County. That's where we are. The red dots in this case represent the country elevators in the area. And the other blue dots represent the other shuttle loading facilities in the area. Okay, so in a 70-mile radius, we have about seven shuttle loaders, high-speed type handling facilities in the area in this case. So what we're looking at is that if in this area here, we're able to get to 50%, and then this area right here, you can see, in this case, we have country elevators there, but we also have some elevator competition in that area also. To the west, to the east rather, we have those that are in the Hutchinson area, which is a much larger ones as well. And to the far west, we also have some that are very large, further west of us in this case. So what we had to do in this case, we had to do a couple of different approaches to this. One, we had to look at what is called a concentration index. How concentrated is the competition in this area? And based upon the method that we chose, it came out to being a very concentrated market, meaning that there are people or there are players or there are those in the marketplace that have power. There's a lot of concentration. There's probably 2 or 3 firms in this area that have a lot of power. In fact, we use an index that the Department of Commerce uses when they're making a decision whether or not somebody can merge with another. Because if you get too many big guys merging, you have this situation where you give too much power to someone else and you don't give enough power to the consumer in that case. So the Department of Commerce uses this index to show that if this number reaches a certain level, we probably will not allow that merger to go through. This number is like a 2,200. Once you get up to like 4,000 or 5,000, there's fewer mergers that are allowed to take place in this case. So to make this short, we see a high level of concentration and power in this particular marketplace. We also looked at what we call a 5 forces model as well. So we kind of look at the other competition, other threats to profit in this area as well. And I won't go into that in detail, but it just kind of gives us an idea of where does the power lie within this marketplace? Is it with the suppliers? Do the suppliers have power in this case? Is it the customers? Do the customers have power in this case? Is there a threat of new entrants coming into this marketplace? Or the threat of other substitutes and things like that? So we want to look at these 4 particular areas here to see where the power might be, or where the threat might be that might end up taking some of our profits away. So we did sort of that type of analysis as well. Todd, you have a wrinkle in your forehead on this one.
No, yeah.
Yeah. No? Okay. Just thinking. So, what we did here is that we provided what we consider to be a stress test, right? Looking at corn, the variables of corn and wheat in this case. In this case, we looked at, and this is the base model, which we saw a little bit earlier. That base model in this case, 2.6 million bushels of corn that we have available for this, 4.5 million bushels of wheat in this case. If we want to get very optimistic about this, now that number goes from 33% up to 43%. Okay? If we're able to get 43% of those shipments going out of the state, then that number goes up to 2.9 million and 4.9, nearly 5 million bushels in this case. If we want to get a little pessimistic about it, instead of 33%, let's go down to 23% in that case, right? Let's take some of it off in this case. We're not too friendly about what's going on here. So that number comes down here, almost to 6.5 million bushels in this case. So the base model, we're looking at 7.2, which is what a lot of our analysis is done on. A very optimistic view of this project, meaning that we're going to get nearly 8 million bushels. A very optimistic view. And Kurt, a very pessimistic view in this case, we're looking at 6.5 million bushels in that case. So we have to look at, and again, what's very important is how often we can turn these bushels, right? And most of the industry discussions we had in this case, you guys really like it if you're turning that elevator over, in this case. We're looking at somewhere between 4 to 10 times you want to turn that elevator over, right? That's one of the great things about trading is that you have options to either store or either to trade. But if you're going to definitely trade, because you have that fixed asset, you've got to turn it over. You need to do it 4 to 10 times in this case. Close. You know, pretty much say we're there. 3.6 if we want to round it up in this case, Kurt. And 3.9 an optimistic view. Pessimistic view, not quite getting up to that 4 turns that you need to successfully mitigate or reduce your average fixed costs. In this case, for shipments, these are talking about shipments, export shipments, right? How many times we're going to ship the product out of that? We're looking at on a per month basis here, 1.5 times a month. So we need to get something, a shuttle loader, a grain shuttle loading facility shipping product out at least once a month. Optimistically, 1.6 months, 1.66 per month, and a pessimistic view of 1.37 in that case. That is the base model.
What's your bottom deal there?
The bottom one right here, this is actually when we started looking at this from a 23% and 17% level. I probably should not have put this one in here, but for the sake of discussion here, this almost gets down to like if we weren't able to, you know the figure I gave you, like we're going to take 33% of the exports, or 33% of the 33% of the crop is being exported or leaving the state. This value down here is that what if we are only 27% for that matter of the exports were leaving the state. So it's kind of another sensitivity analysis that we're trying to do. So this one is like we're saying, hey, we can get more product is actually from Stafford County is actually leaving the state here, and this one right here is a little bit less in that case. That would be the difference in the two. And we applied some base optimistic and pessimistic view to that calculation as well. Sure.
Your bottom ones, bottom numbers are bigger than your top numbers.
can we just eliminate this one? This shouldn't even be here.
Okay.
It shouldn't be here. This is- Yeah. Uh-huh, no. I see. I see what's here. Let me double check something. Okay, I think what we did in this case is that we took this as being the bottom one here, Todd. I think we looked at this one in this case and said, actually, if we were going to take it up to that, this is where we're gonna get more of the crop that's being exported out of the state. This is the one, this really should be our base test right here. Okay, again, going back to that 33% number that we talked about a little earlier.
Yeah. And so the top would be the 23%,
It
the
would be-
bottom would be the
Exactly.
33%.
We flipped them here. This is the one that we're basing our base model off of right here,
Just
which is more aggressive.
so I can kind of more fully process the scope of things. When we
Mhm.
say of the shipment market, what we know leaves the state in rail shipments, what portion of that is, what is that portion of overall production?
So if we have 4 point, let me take a quick look here. Let me give you the total production number here. Okay, we have 4.2 million bushels of wheat and 6.9 million bushels, 6.9 million bushels of corn. So 4.2 and 6.9 in this case, so we're talking about 11.3 million bushels roughly. Okay, so if we have 11.3 million
In
bushels
Stafford County alone?
in Stafford County alone, that's the 5-year average in this case.
Okay.
And if we go back to our shipments here from Stafford County, we're looking at 4 million of that. So on a percentage basis, which is it's like 35%.
Which makes sense. We're not consuming wheat in Stafford County, most of it. I mean, other than the mill,
The flour
it's
mill.
all
The flour mill
somewhere
would tend to
else.
skew our
Yeah.
numbers more
I don't
than.
know how much they use, 1.5 million
Well, I'm
bushels.
sure you could find out, yeah.
Yeah, that would.
The rule could tell you.
And some of the wheat could very well be going to other mills in the state as well.
Where's the closest other mill?
Wichita, I think.
Wichita.
McPherson, doesn't McPherson have, oh, not McPherson.
Salina.
Salina.
ADM has one.
It's still quite a ways away.
Yeah. Does that clear that up,
Yep.
Carol and Mary?
It does, yes.
So we're taking this bottom model here and looking at it from a base and an optimistic perspective in this case. We can look at the total bushels, the base at 10.8, optimistic is 4.3, 7.2 is the pessimistic. Terms per year again, 5.4. Again, we're trying to get that 4 to 10 terms per year. This is what we're looking at here, and calculates into shipments per month. So we're going to take this 10.8 number, and we're going to use that as our number that we're going to use for our income statement in this case. Okay. So in our income statement, we're looking at volume of 10.8 million bushels in this case. And we kind of increase it about 2%, assuming that we're going to get some volume increase over a 10-year period. The 10-year period is what we've been using for the most part as it's somewhat of a break even. It's sort of a horizon that some firms will determine whether or not this investment is something they want to do. Do you want to have it paid back in 5 years, or do you want to have it paid back in 10 years? It really depends on the risk preference of the firm in terms of what they want to choose. A lot of multinationals, 5 years is probably about all they want to do. Other private type organizations, they may go a little bit longer. I've seen in some co-ops even go longer than that for that matter. So it really depends on the risk preference or the policy of that organization in this case. So in this case, again, we're starting at year 1, which is our base model level in this case, a volume of 10.8 million bushels. We move it out to as much as 12 million bushels in year 10. So then we start looking at our gross margins, and these are the numbers that we were able to get from, these gross margin numbers fall right in line to what we were hearing from the industry from this standpoint. Gross margins is anywhere between really like 15 to 35%. It really varies, kind of a wide spring, but we're putting in the gross margin in this case of 20 cents in this case. Handling costs, again, we were able to get this from a number of different of the interviews we had. Net margin in this case, really, we kind of have net margin of the 3.6%, which kind of speaks to some of the narrow margins that the grain guys operate on. This is not, which makes it a really volume-intensive type of business. I mean, most businesses with the margins, they're small, they really rely on volume to make their profit in this case.
Once you take off your handling costs off your gross margin though, it should be, like that first one should be 16 cents. I mean, all the rest of them, unless you have some other cost figured in, yeah, sometimes it doesn't quite work that way.
Sometimes it doesn't.
What's the other cost?
We could have the transportation costs coming in there for that matter, which is gonna, we kind of rolled this into our gross margin number in some cases, or in this case.
So your gross margin is, like that first year, you're saying 20 cents a bushel?
Yes, yes. And we're saying, over a period of time, some assumptions, pretty close assumptions we're having, it should raise a little bit here. It should increase a
If the
little bit.
price of commodities would increase, you could sure expand your margin.
You sure could, absolutely.
It's pretty hard to expand your margin right now.
It is. It's very difficult. And if we were to look at the pessimistic view, we could probably see that as well.
Yeah.
Would that show itself? That's a good question. So we're looking at net margins that are somewhat skinny, I would say, but that is the business of grain handling. We see that on corn as well, in terms of the gross margin. Again, these numbers are really in line with what we were able to learn from some of the interviews that we've had.
There's a little more margin in corn than there is in wheat.
A little bit more. Not bad. We're going from 3.6 to 5.3 in this
Yeah.
case. And also, there's always an option for that elevator to do store as well. Like you have an option of either you're going to store it or you're going to trade it for that matter. What we found is that there's a mix typically that usually about 65% of the time you want to merchandise your product, 35% of the time you want to be able to store your product. It really depends on what the incentives are in the market at the time. Right? If there's a carry market and the market is willing to allow you to carry the product for a period of time, then you're going to have more of a storage type of a plan. But from a merchandiser's perspective, particularly those that are managing the shuttle elevators, they usually look at that mix of 65, 35% storage versus trading versus storage in that case.
So, from the producer's point of view, when he hauls that in, would he have the option of paying you storage or just selling it right at that point that he delivers the wheat or corn in there?
The latter. I would say that
He's gonna get just, when he delivers it, he's gonna get paid, right?
he's going to get paid for that.
He doesn't have the option to say, hey, I wanna wait, what kind of storage are you gonna charge me or anything like that?
Well, I guess in practice and theory, you could do something like that. I guess that's the arrangement that's going to be between whomever's going to merchandise it and whoever's gonna raise it in that case, right? But it's been my experience merchandising is that I'm probably gonna buy that from that person, and I'm probably gonna carry that holder for myself for some of the trading opportunity.
So the storage would be on somebody else if they don't want
Yeah.
to sell it right away.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have your total net margins, what's the SG, what are those two figures there?
SG&A stands for sales and general and administrative. In many cases, it's overhead, right? All those expenses that goes into sales, your general administration type of expenses. Again, that could be going back to, this area right here. That would be SG&A.
On the next line,
The interest,
the other one,
EBITDA,
yeah.
okay, earnings before interest and taxes, and
Okay.
depreciation. So when we look at the net income, and this is what's going to feed back into our net present value model here, we want to take a look at, these are the expected cash flows that we can receive from this operation. And what we're essentially saying is that year 2 or year 10 is so far out in the future, we have to discount it back to what it can be equated to what it means in a present value in that case, right? And so we could realize this 1.48 fairly soon, but the expected cash flows after that period, they could be increasing, but we need to, again, bring it back to today's value and not look at it as tomorrow's values in that case. So when we take a look at this case right here, here we have an example here of, let's say we have a private investor and they're going to assume 100% of the capital expenditures in this case. And we have two options, one being steel, $6.8 million would be the capex for that, and concrete would be the $20 million expense for that. And if we look at the scenarios, whether we look at the base model, an optimistic model, or a pessimistic volume model or scenario, if we look at it from that perspective, we can look at what our net present value is going to show us here. So we can see it growing positive somewhere probably in that 10th year, perhaps even off of maybe going into that 9th year for that matter. An optimistic view gives us a 15-year period, we can see it definitely going to be positive for the investment. That's on the very optimistic view. However, when we take a look at the base model and the pessimistic model, we don't see it where, based off of the income statement and the other values that we've chosen here, we just don't see it becoming a positive investment. Definitely not until, definitely sometime after 15 years. But we can see something in the 10-year and 15-year if we look at it very optimistically. Concrete, which is a bit more of an expensive investment than steel in that case. And in this case, what we find is that we can start seeing concrete becoming positive net present value for our investment in around year 15. Maybe a little bit more, maybe year 14 or something. Now, let's say, for example, the county subsidizes with a $5.8 million subsidy. And that subsidy in this case could be the land value, that subsidy could be the trackage, or some of the fixed costs related to investment like that. So we look at the land costs, and we look at the trackage and switches and things like that. We're looking at that roughly being about a $5.8 million, let's say, a subsidy in this case. So then we begin to take a look at steel and concrete again, and we can start seeing with that, we start seeing under the optimistic model, we start seeing a positive payback, probably sometime in the year 8 or year 9 or 10 definitely. For the base model, we can start seeing some type of a payback in this case, positive payback, a positive net present value, I should say, around that 15th year. Around that 15th year. And if we go concrete, again, optimistic. We're showing some very positive net present values in this case. Just not seeing it as we would like it would be on the base model. And if the county decided to subsidize even further here, we can see in the bottom table in this case, we're able to see that the base model does show a positive net present value in the year 10. And optimistic, it very well could happen much sooner than that. What are your thoughts on, what do you think when you see something like this?
I was hoping it'd be better than that, but.
In terms of when it would
Pay
show us
back,
up probably, yeah. 5 year, is what you're hoping?
Yeah.
What do you feel like like Bartlett and the bigger grain companies that have a facility like that, what do you reckon? I mean, those are facilities that are probably gonna last for 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
I mean, are they happy if it pays off within 10? Or they want it to pay off in 5?
They're usually around that 5 to 7,
Yeah.
usually.
Did you talk about the idea that some of those bigger companies have a network and may view it a little differently than we're looking at this as a standalone investment?
Mhm. That's an excellent point. Yeah, you know, a lot of the guys are working with a network that will allow them different storage opportunities, different trading opportunities. In the case of Bartlett, they have an operation in Mexico that is really devoted to receiving the output from the facility. It's a great band. Yeah, in Great Bend, right? They were able to pay that facility off in 4 years.
So Wind River at different times has brought corn in and then shipped it out. You know, they trade more than just exporting.
Yeah, Wind River was really an interesting situation because when that ethanol plant showed up there, they were able to do a lot of importing of corn and turn it into ethanol and then shipping it out. So they were using that facility even in a different way. So their
That's
mix,
different, too.
their mix is different, which really, but the interesting thing about Wind River Grain, they were very, very good people to work with, by the way. When they started this, those things weren't in place. They developed later on. You know, the ethanol plant came later on. When they would start shipping feedlots, that came later on for them, right? But
Wind turbines
it came later on, exactly. You know, so, but yeah, I think when we look at a lot of the multinationals, they have this network effect, which we can't quite see how they're making the decisions based upon the fact that they could be storing here and trading over here and arbitraging in this area, and those change depending upon what's going on in the marketplace, right? And they're getting probably some really good freight rates as well, right? Because of that network effect that they have. So they may, in some cases, and this is going back to my own experience of trading, of merchandising, you may be willing to take a loss in this area because you see this really huge opportunity over here, right? And that could very well be happening as well. We can't, our model doesn't show that. Our model doesn't show the network effect, which we're kind of blinded in that case in terms of what those management decisions might be because you have, you know, a number of elevators to operate with as opposed to one elevator.
So where you guys did this study, this kind of helps Carolyn out as far as if she has a Wind River or some other company that she's looking at, you can take these numbers, which they'll be able to have a better idea of what their expenses and stuff like that are. But probably what they're looking at is what we think our bushels, capable bushels, that they would get, and then what their competition would be. But then basically everything else, they'll punch in their own figures.
They would.
So their deal might look totally different than ours.
Potentially. Here's the thing about that as well, is that this becomes a starting point more than anything else, right? Now, I think Carolyn has more information to have that discussion that she may not have been able to have before. All they were telling us is that, telling Carolyn in this case, is that we're looking at your area, now we've decided to go somewhere else. correct me if I'm wrong. with
Yeah,
no
I
no
mean-
other feedback. you
Right,
know,
I don't have data
no.
specific, I did see some on a table at one point, but I didn't get to keep that, you
Right,
know?
exactly. So I think things like this become a really good starting point, a good discussion point, you know, to maybe further clarify why this decision was made or what needs to be changed or adjusted, or how would they change or adjust these numbers that make it fit for them. So that's where we sort of see that in that case. So what we're saying here is that we really don't see any solid evidence. The grain density is one of the biggest issues that we have in this area. We have the density, the competition. I think those are things that tend to work against any study for that matter, or any justification of that investment. Subsidy $11 million would kind of close that gap with grain shortage. In the short term, we do see some things going on in the export market that might reduce the demand for corn in the future here. When I say short term, I'm talking about the next year or two. We've seen some export numbers that don't look really positive for exports. But we all know that is not a static situation. That changes for that matter, right? And as such, we see it in that way. What we see, really a profitable volume for grain, we're looking at 18 to 25 million bushels. And I think you get to 18 to 25 million bushels, and I think if you can get to a 10-year payback, you're probably right in the ballpark in that case. There could be an opportunity, as we talked about earlier, about a complementary business that has some higher profit margins and lower capital requirements. For example, we did some work. In this particular case, this happens to be a warehouse here locally. This is Kansas operation here. So we're looking at this. And this is the United Warehouse that we went to visit in where we're in Wichita. Right? So we'd be looking at something right around this size. But we looked at some of the financials for Kansas in this case, and we were able to extrapolate and understand that they're getting about 13% profit margin on their warehousing activities and such. This is public information. You can find that by looking at their financials in this case. Potential activities: sales of fertilizer, feed, agricultural chemicals, seed, convenience store, petroleum could be opportunities here. So in this case, you're looking at a capex of anywhere to $3.5 to $5 million for a 75 to 100,000 square foot facility in this case, which is more of this size here, which is something that obviously exists in this area at this point here. So this could be a potential type of an investment. Where we struggle with this is what would be the products that we would run through it. Right? And these facilities, Todd, if you remember, we went to the United Warehouse. What was really key for them is to turn that inventory. The Coca-Cola business that they had, the cans. These you have to really store. That's where you make your money off of. Your in and out charges, your relatively small storage costs. You're out again, you do it again, right?
Yeah.
If you just use it for storage, for that matter, that's when you looking more at what we look at the Garvey warehouse. You remember that warehouse?
That was almost kind of a distribution where they just got the loads of lumber and then shipped them out.
And ship them out, yeah. And they often stayed there for a little longer time too.
Yeah.
So the storage aspect is not as profitable as the turning aspect of it. So we're trying to think of what could be used in this warehouse that could be turned quickly. So it'd have to be something that would be used locally, that someone would want to bring it in, keep it for a short period of time, and take it back out. And that's where your charging becomes more important, because you can charge your inbound charge, your storage bound, and your outbound charge. You do that a number of times, you make up a pretty good business there. But that's what we did. We did struggle with that piece in terms of what locally, other than what is currently here. Fertilizer, feed, chemicals, things of that nature. And this is where you've got to be thought of the third-party logistics piece there. So that is in a nutshell, is what we were able to arrive at. And again, I think one of the big considerations, again, is the volume. Another huge consideration is the network. I think those are the two big issues there. The supply chain is very important as well, that being the country elevators and the growers, the farmers for that matter. You need to have that supply chain well in place, I would say. There's very good relationships within that from the grain origination perspective. So the supply chain, extremely important. Volume, extremely important. And understanding and being a part of a network would be very advantageous for any sugar facility.
I don't know quite how this can be incorporated, but it's still, I don't know, you've probably thought about this, but, I mean, we got local elevators making $8 or $10 million a year just on storage alone. Could we compete with that? I mean, that's why I asked you the storage question.
Oh,
Kensico has grows, or netted $8 to $10 million for years and years, and I mean, 90% of that's probably on green storage.
right.
So, but that sounds to me like though, they're making that money from the farmer. The farmer's
Yes.
paying that. So
Yes.
would the farmer be more willing to sell at, right?
Right.
And
Or
not pay,
charge
not,
less.
not only not pay
Or
the storage,
charge
but
less
conceivably
storage.
get a higher, I mean, there'd be a lower basis, right?
I would
So
think there'd be a way to compete there, yeah.
I think there's more of a farmer mindset there
Yeah.
that's
the
just gonna
problem.
have to change.
They're hedging.
Yeah. You know,
I've always
more of the
called it in here.
younger guys are selling more crops before the crop is ever planted,
Mhm.
as far as they get the better price when they deliver it and they don't have to pay storage. Or instead of paying 4 cents a month with elevator, if you're wanting to hold it, sell your crop and buy it back at a lower trade.
Mhm, mhm.
Then you don't have to pay the storage.
So
But
you're saying it's a generational?
I think so.
For sure.
I know,
You can be stupid
there's
like
some
I am.
older farmers that
Yeah.
think that you need to be holding the crop in the elevator
Yeah.
at all points,
Oh.
in
so
case
that's what you're
things turn
saying.
bad.
Yeah, I see.
They're paying,
Yeah,
the elevators are charging between 4 and 5 cents, so if I hold a bushel of wheat there for
I see.
a year
You see what
at
it's
5
done.
cents,
Yeah.
I've got 60 cents in storage.
yeah,
And a
you
bushel of
lost
wheat
$2 or
that weighs me
$3.
is worth $4.
yeah.
There's a lot of
I
that
see.
goes on, and that's where they're making their monies on guys that do
I see.
that.
Yeah. Any idea in terms of, is that 50/50, or most of the guys doing that? 90% of the guys are paying the elevator to store it for them, or, I'm just
I'll
curious
bet
how you
you-
feel about that.
That'd be a good question, but I wouldn't be surprised it wasn't 50-50.
I don't know if it's that much. I mean, the last time I talked to the guy at Great Bend, where I do the majority of my
Oh,
commodities,
sure.
selling, getting your commodities priced. He said probably less than 30% of farmers at Great Bend Co-op.
Or,
That do what?
Basically, selling your product, or, I can't even think my mind's.
Forward pricing?
Yeah, forward pricing.
Oh,
So there's.
Contracting your corn, contracting your beans.
okay. Okay.
There's some of them that are forced to, but
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you handle that?
At this point of the year, I usually like to have about 60 to 70% of my crop sold of corn before I ever even get it put in the ground.
Okay, so you're hedging it?
Yep,
Yeah.
and sometimes I go higher than that, but usually I try to do 60, 70%. Because we've already passed, unless this flood and drought deal, comes about, in Iowa and Illinois and Missouri,
Mhm.
we've already missed our opportunity to get good prices on corn.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the way the merchandiser would see it is where is going to be his best opportunity to make money himself, right? If he sees that, the market is allowing me to carry this product, sure, I'll take it and I'll carry it.
yeah.
But if you want to pay me storage, I'll weigh that as well, right? Because the market will tell you whether or not you need to sell it today or you need to store it, right? Depending on what they carry in the marketplace.
That's the part.
But they're in the game, they want to turn multiple times a year. That's where that business model, that's what it's based on, right? So
65% of the time at least.
they're not gonna want to just store 2 million bushels. They don't even have that much, you know,
Right.
that's not very many bushels in the scheme of things, right? So
That's a good point.
would,
They should
could they
make
take
all
in
of
grain
it.
that they haven't actually purchased? They can still ship it, they just have to have warehouse receipts for wherever it's being shipped to. Is that right?
Mhm.
Okay.
And like at some of the feedlots you haul to, if you haul corn to a feedlot, you know, you haul it in November, by December 31st, it's gotta be priced. They'll allow you to store it, or, you know, hold it there for just a month or two, but then,
You have to price.
yeah, and once you haul it in there, you can't take it out and say, I'm gonna haul it down here.
Yeah.
I mean, once it's there, it's theirs, they give you a month and a half to watch the price and sell it when you
Oh,
want to.
and do they not charge storage for that?
No.
Really? Yeah.
They used to sell it on that 10-month deal, do they do that anymore?
You know, I don't know, I never got in on any of that.
I hauled corn to the feedlot and they sold 10% every month for it.
Really?
And they take the average of all the elevators and add a nickel onto it.
Tom, what you're
No
suggesting,
storage on
that's
that,
interesting. It's interesting that they would do that and not charge storage on something like that.
On the grain, on, you know, on like feedlots?
Yeah, on the feedlot piece, right? Because, so who has the risk in this case, right? It's like both of them are assuming the risk to some
Yeah.
degree, right?
Yeah, yes,
Because it's unpriced.
yeah.
They would have the risk, wouldn't they? The feedlot?
I would
That's
guess,
I know you have the risk though, I mean,
If you-
if you're putting your corn there at the feedlot, and if they're, don't wash their moisture and your corn turns brown and rots,
They're still
it's
gonna-
your corn,
It's your corn.
Yeah.
cause they haven't bought it yet.
Or if the price goes down,
Yeah, I think
it's
once
your
you
corn
cross
at a lower
the
price.
scales, it's, you got your corn there.
Yeah.
Maybe what makes that work is that both of them have some risk in this piece.
Yeah,
Both, you know, the grower and the feedlot has some risk in that case. And I think that's the situation for most elevators, even for a shuttle train elevator as well. Is, you know, who's gonna take the risk? I'm gonna, 65% of my time I'm gonna trade it, 35% of my time I'm going to store it. And how that will dictate itself or play itself out is gonna be really what's going on with the market price and your level of risk tolerance.
yeah.
But again, I think, again, we appreciate the opportunity to work on something like this. The final document, we'll have to figure out how we want to distribute that to you, Carolyn, but at this point, it's about a 40-page document at this point. You tell us if you want to have it pared down a little bit more.
What is a 40-page document?
The study,
full?
the full study.
I'm nerdy enough, I will actually.
Is that right? Yeah, we get a lot into the market aspects of it, who has power in the marketplace, market concentration, we go into other type of, other financial analysis as well. Because we have the variables of volume and the variables of price, that's what makes it, that's why we do a lot of stress test or sensitivity testing, because those variables could go one way or another over a 18-year period, or however long you want to invest. What would you think is a good investment period? Would you say is 10 years? Is that too much?
Well, that part, that's the operating business, that's not the county.
It is, it would be.
But if you put up grain bins there at your farm, how quick would you want to pay for it? I mean, when you think about putting up a facility that's gonna last you 30
Yeah, they
years.
paid for themselves really quick.
Yeah,
I'd say they paid for themselves in 3 to 5 years
yeah. But would have you
Easily.
been happy with 10?
on my own storage, but
Okay.
what?
Would have you been happy with 10?
I could have lived with it, yeah.
Well, there's that stuff, the network, the other factors. It might have depended on your desire to manage tax liability in a particular year or something like
Yeah.
that, you know?
For sure.
I don't know.
You know, because I remember merchandising grain, and this would happen with Cargill all the time. I was with General Mills, and we had elevators in a number of different places, and we'd be trading with Cargill in a certain area, and you know they were taking a loss in that area. We just know it was, because there's no way in the world you can buy and sell and trade at these levels and make money. There's no way. But we didn't see what their whole network was doing,
Yeah.
right? They were willing to do something here because they could make up for it over here. And they could force, sometimes they could force grain going in certain directions just because of the pricing mechanism. They were able to do that all the time. And that's what is hard for us to capture in this piece right here.
Yeah.
That's where the multinationals, or the MKC for that matter, would be very helpful in that sense in terms of how do they view an investment as a part of their network and not just a standalone piece.
For sure.
And then some of them are interconnected very much with a particular multinational, even if they themselves aren't that,
That's
you know.
a very good point.
Like Wind River is very connected to Cargill.
To Cargill, absolutely.
And so, I mean, yeah, how I look at this, like you said, it's a starting point, it's a more concrete conversation I could have with one of those potential occupants. I would have, sure, I would have liked to have seen less red there, but I think there's several other factors that, of course, you can't account for here. And, you know, I would have liked for that, especially the 5.8, to be kind of the place where we see a more clear scenario that seems advantageous. But even at 11, I don't know. Where I'm going with this is I'm looking at what kind of federal programs are available. I don't think there's any way in the world we can meet the deadline for this year's application. There's one through U.S. Department of Transportation that has a July 15th deadline. And when I look at the kinds of things that we would need to have to be competitive, we'd need to have the land, we'd need to have the track engineered and cost estimates of what that would actually cost. You know, you need to have agreements with businesses, whether that's the grain or like a warehouse, which I think would, you know, United Warehouse, when we went there that day, they said, you know, if you progress in this, we'd like to stay in touch with you, okay? So, you know, that might be that other business that could feed into this and make that payback look different. This particular grant application has a specific cost benefit analysis you have to do, and I haven't gotten into what that exactly entails yet. I don't know if I'm capable of doing that, even though I'm a trained economist. It may be outside my pay grade, but, you know, I would look at that kind of stuff, getting KDOT's buy-in on it. You know, I've told KDOT that, you know, I've looked at this, I've asked them about, okay, are you setting in your own set of projects from KDOT, or can counties individually? Well, the answer is kind of both. You know, they may have some specific projects that they're kind of prioritizing, but we can also send something in. And if they were aware of it, they might also try to, they also have rail money that can be used for this type of project. It might be something where they put in a piece of match with it. But again, these things aren't gonna happen by July 15th, 2019. It's really probably looking at 2020, which might not all, I don't know, they keep talking about putting more money into infrastructure from the federal, you know, to talk about an infrastructure bill, it'd probably go into programs like that. It might not be a bad thing to have to wait longer for applying anyway. But there's another thing I have learned just a little bit about recently, but BNSF has a program where they'll certify sites. So making sure our site, if we were along a railroad, met the qualifications that they look for in a site that they serve would be, I bet, a good thing to do, but that's not gonna happen by July 15th either, so.
Yeah, that would be a good first
But
step.
all of this, I
Right.
think, helps though move toward, they would certainly, if we were doing a cost benefit, having an independent analysis that feeds into that would be, I think, very,
Starting point, yeah, right. Would you consider doing a complementary type of business first before moving into a larger investment in that case?
maybe, I
Yeah.
don't know. I guess I had processed before that what our bread and butter in commerce is around here is grain.
I understand.
And it makes
Yeah.
sense to use what you've got in volume as your anchor. But maybe that's not the best way of looking at it. Maybe it is a smaller business that has higher margins and wouldn't need all of the infrastructure all at once.
Just a thought.
And I guess also, I know we're looking at millions of dollars and that gets daunting, but this build program that I'm talking about is a $900 million program. And the award minimum is $1 million in a rural area, $5 million otherwise. And I think the average is somewhere close to 20 million. So a $5 to $11 million request might not be outside the realm of possibility.
Possibilities. You know, I think in these investment decisions, sometimes it's not as much, in my thinking, it's not as much as the initial investment amount as how quickly you can get it to be profitable.
Interesting, yeah.
You know,
Right.
if I invested $20 million and I can get it paid off in 2 years, but if I had to make a $10 million investment and I could get it paid off in 12 years, I'll take the 20 million. It's a much larger number, but my payback is much faster too,
Yeah.
right?
The rate of payback. Another,
Exactly.
a different angle on a similar concept is when I looked at the, when we did the grocery store project, the differential between doing something at the old build, what we were looking at is, do you do a grocery store at the old building, small format, blah, 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 or do you build something new? Well, in the old building, we'd had $1 million wrapped up in it easily with just equipment and modest modifications. It wouldn't have been free, and then you spend 3.8. The differential is basically 2 to 2.8 million, which in the scheme of a 20-year though, the difference in salaries, the difference in taxes, the difference, it's the 2.5 million initial investment is not the story. It's the 20-year difference in salaries is, well, I think it was around 20 million. The difference.
Really?
Yeah. Over the course of 20 years, the difference in salaries alone was something in that scope. So it makes the initial investment seem less
Daunting.
daunting.
Don't trip and fall down. You're probably getting low blood sugar, this is getting off the post. Well, thank you for your time.
Again, good numbers. Appreciate
over
it.
there. It's a pleasure, Rebecca.
Again, you have the presentation and you have the overall summary of it as well, and we'll soon be getting another document to Carolyn. If you want to have something that you can look at at night.
You need to go to sleep.
I was gonna say when you watch the Chiefs play, but maybe the Royals, that may be better. If you watch the Royals play, yeah.
I've tried that too many times.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Your work.
We have, can we read this up?
Yeah, we need to get that up.
We have a road crossing permit for Carmen Schmidt. He's wanting to bore underneath the road up there just south of Radium.
Yeah.
Yep, they're moving it from the flood ground. Gonna move the water rights across the road. Permit number is 424-2019.
Second?
Yeah, I move we approve the permit number 424, 2019.
We have a
second.
motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. Does everybody need to sign or just me? And, let's see.
You will not be meeting next week.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Okay,
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Are you thinking at all about going to KCCA? Or
You
Next
mean
week.
here? No, I'm probably not gonna go.
Okay.
All right.
Did you get any rain?
Pardon?
Did you get any rain?
It sprinkled on me most of the day yesterday, but that was about
How about
it.
that night before when the Burton County got over?
I got a little sprinkle on the sidewalk, looked out 30 minutes, it was dry, and I went to John Deere in person, they're like, yeah, we got 90 hundreds.
I know. I think Burton County only got a pretty good rain.
We'll adjourn.